Good morning. Let me begin with a story. A few months ago, I met a young professional, smart, driven. She had all the tools for success: the resume, the network, the ambition, but she was anxious, burned out. Not from overwork, but from overexposure. She told me, "It feels like my life isn't mine anymore. Everything's out there." And she's not alone. We live in a time where privacy is seen as secrecy, and secrecy is viewed with suspicion. We confuse transparency with vulnerability. We share first and process later. And in 2025, when every app wants a piece of us and every algorithm wants to know us better than we know ourselves, we need to talk about the value of keeping some things private. Not because we have something to hide, but because we have something to protect. So here are 7 things we should keep private in 2025, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. 1. Your deepest goals, dreams are sacred. They don't need applause to be real. Sometimes, the moment we announce a goal, we feel a premature sense of accomplishment and we lose the fire. Keep your ambitions close until they're strong enough to stand on their own. 2. Your intimate relationships' love doesn't grow in the spotlight. The most meaningful relationships, romantic or otherwise, don't need a play on social media. Validation online doesn't equal connection offline. Protect your bond by giving it space to breathe in private. 3. Your acts of kindness, there's a kind of generosity that doesn't post receipts. When you give, give quietly, not because no one's watching, but because it means more when you're not. 4. Your struggles now hear me clearly. I believe in openness. I believe in support. But not all wounds are meant to be shared in real time. Heal first, then help. Let your story become someone's survival guide, but only after you've lived it. 5. Your family matters. What happens in your family, the disagreements, the decisions, the dynamics is not public property. It's easy to overshare when we're frustrated, but dignity means knowing when to stay silent to preserve respect for others and for ourselves. 6. Your finances, money is a tool, not a trophy. Whether you have a lot or a little, your financial life is yours. Flaunting wealth can breed comparison. Oversharing scarcity can invite unnecessary judgment. Practice financial discretion, not shame, just self-respect. 7. Your spiritual life, whatever you believe, faith, values, your connection to something greater, it's personal. Not because it's private by rule, but because it's precious by nature. The most powerful beliefs don't shout, they guide. Now let me be clear, privacy isn't isolation. It's not about closing yourself off. It's about choosing intention over impulse. Boundaries are not barriers. They are borders of self-respect. In 2025, the people who thrive won't be the loudest. They'll be the ones who know how to filter the noise, who know what to share, what to protect, and why it matters. Because here's the truth. The most valuable parts of your life don't need an audience. They need your attention. Privacy is not secrecy, it's self-respect. In a world where oversharing has become normalized, where we're encouraged to display every aspect of our lives for validation, attention, or even just the sense of being seen, the lines between privacy and secrecy have blurred. Somewhere along the way, we began equating privacy with hiding, as if withholding parts of ourselves was inherently deceptive. But that's a misunderstanding and a dangerous one, because what we choose to keep private is not always something we're ashamed of. Often, it's something we're choosing to protect. Privacy is a form of self-respect because it stems from the belief that not everything we experience, believe, feel, or endure needs to be put on display for others to interpret, analyze, or critique. It is a choice to hold certain things sacred. In 2025, we are inundated with platforms designed to reward us for sharing. Likes for thoughts, comments for photos, engagement for opinions. There is almost no experience too personal to be turned into content. But just because we can share something doesn't mean we should. Choosing privacy is an act of intentionality. It's about knowing that some experiences, especially the formative ones, need time to incubate, to mature without the pressure of external judgment. When we keep our goals private, for example, we give them room to grow without premature commentary or unsolicited advice. When we keep our relationships private, we protect them from narratives imposed by others. When we choose to hold our struggles quietly until we're ready to speak about them, we're not pretending everything is okay, we're preserving our strength while it's still fragile. There is a strength in restraint. There is dignity in discretion. Think about the people you admire, truly admire, not just those who entertain or provoke. Think about the mentors, the elders, the quiet leaders. Often, what draws us to them is not just what they say, but the weight of how they say it. The sense that their words are anchored in something they don't feel the need to constantly prove. That kind of presence comes from a life that's not lived entirely in public. It comes from having boundaries, not walls, but boundaries that guard the most important parts of who they are. This is where the distinction between secrecy and privacy becomes essential. Secrecy is usually rooted in fear. It says, if people knew this about me, they'd reject me. Privacy, on the other hand, is rooted in confidence. It says, I don't need everyone to understand this for it to be real. Secrecy hides because it feels unworthy. Privacy protects because it knows its worth. When you respect yourself, you become a better steward of your own story. You stop handing out pieces of your identity to anyone who asks. You stop leaking your energy into every conversation, every comment section, every digital feed. You begin to live with a deeper awareness of what's yours to share and what's yours to keep. This doesn't mean you become guarded or aloof. It doesn't mean you stop trusting people. In fact, privacy allows for deeper trust, not less. Because when you choose what to share, you're also choosing who to share it with. That's where intimacy is built in selective vulnerability, not in emotional exhibition. There is something profoundly meaningful about being trusted with someone's inner world, but that meaning is lost when it's offered to everyone, all the time, with no filter. And we're not just talking about emotional privacy. Even in professional life, keeping some things private is a matter of self-respect. Your ideas, your strategies, your internal motivations, not everything needs to be broadcast. In an age of constant personal branding, the temptation is to commodify even your process. But some of the best innovations, the most brilliant breakthroughs, come from those who worked quietly, without distraction, and without the need for applause. They trusted the work to speak for itself when the time was right. What's interesting is that as much as we fear being forgotten, if we don't share constantly, the opposite is often true. People remember those who are intentional with their words, who don't flood the air with noise. The ones who speak when they have something meaningful to say, not just something to post. There's a kind of mystery that's not manipulative, but magnetic. That magnetism comes from self-possession, and self-possession is only possible when you know how to keep parts of yourself just for you. There's also something to be said for the mental clarity that privacy allows. The more of yourself you put on display, the more you invite interpretation. That means more opinions, more feedback, more pressure to explain or justify your choices. And while some feedback can be helpful, much of it is noise that clutters your intuition, dilutes your conviction, and ultimately distances you from your own internal compass. Privacy reduces that noise. It allows you to listen to yourself without the echo chamber of the world constantly chiming in. In 2025, this clarity is more valuable than ever because the volume is only getting louder, more platform. More exposure, more temptation to chase relevance at the cost of authenticity. But relevance fades, integrity doesn't. When you choose privacy out of self-respect, you're choosing to invest in long-term trust, not short-term attention. And perhaps most importantly, privacy allows for personal evolution. When you keep something private, a goal, a belief, a change of heart, you give yourself permission to grow without having to explain every step of the process. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to learn and unlearn. But if you're constantly broadcasting, you lock yourself into a version of yourself that the public expects. And when you try to evolve, the backlash isn't just external, it's internal. You feel like a fraud for becoming someone new because you made your old self a brand. Self-respect says, I can grow quietly. I don't owe anyone a front row seat to my transformation. I can come back stronger, clearer, better, and I don't have to prove it with a post. Not everything valuable needs to be visible. We live in a time where visibility is currency. If you can show it, you can sell it. If it's seen, it's believed. We've created a culture that equates exposure with worth, as if something only matters if enough people are watching. But the truth is, some of the most valuable things in life are invisible to the public eye. They're not broadcasted. They're not validated by metrics. They live quietly in the background, holding everything else together. There's this modern assumption that if you're doing something important, you should share it. That your work, your process, your every move should be documented in real time. But the value of a thing is not found in how often it's posted. It's found in how deeply it impacts, how much it endures, and how aligned it is with who you really are. Visibility is a tool, but it's not a measure of truth. Something can be loud and hollow. Something else can be silent and strong. This obsession with visibility starts early. We're taught to show our wins, our progress, our daily grind. We're encouraged to be transparent, which too often becomes code for available for consumption. It's not inherently wrong to share your life, your work, your ideas, but it becomes a problem when you feel pressure to share simply to prove that you're doing something. There is a difference between communicating and performing. When you cross the line into performance, you begin to make choices based on what looks good rather than what is good. Not everything that matters will trend. Not every meaningful moment will be photogenic. Some of the most important work you'll ever do will happen behind the scenes when no one's clapping, when no one's looking, when no one even knows what you're building. And that's okay. In fact, that's often where the real work gets done. Think about relationships. The strongest relationships are not the ones that get the most likes on anniversary posts. They're the ones built in quiet moments, the tough conversations, the shared silence, the daily acts of kindness no one sees. Think about leadership. The most effective leaders are not always the ones in the spotlight. They're the ones mentoring in private, making decisions that won't earn them praise, staying true to their values even when no one's watching. What's valuable isn't always visible, and what's visible isn't always valuable. Social media, digital platforms, and even the workplace sometimes confuse the two. We reward performance over purpose, presence over integrity, noise over depth. But deep value comes from substance, and substance doesn't need to scream to be real. When you build something worthwhile, a relationship, a business, a sense of purpose, it often requires solitude. It needs time to form without external pressure, without an audience. This doesn't mean you isolate yourself. It means you understand the importance of sacred space. You allow things to take shape before you expose them to public opinion. Because once something becomes visible, it becomes vulnerable to misinterpretation. It becomes content, and not everything is meant to be consumed. There's a kind of internal richness that comes when you stop trying to prove and start focusing on being. You begin to invest more energy into the quality of your actions rather than the appearance of your actions. You stop asking, will this look good? And start asking, is this right for me? That shift is where real growth begins, because growth doesn't happen in the spotlight. It happens in process, slow, silent, often messy, but deeply formative. The problem with constant visibility is that it creates a loop of external validation. You start to define your progress by how many people acknowledge it. You measure your worth by how many people see your effort. And when the feedback stops, you start to question your value. But you were never meant to be fueled solely by affirmation. The most resilient people are those who have learned how to validate themselves quietly, confidently, and consistently. This applies to creative work, too. Artists, writers, entrepreneurs, anyone building something meaningful knows that not every stage of the journey is meant to be shared. Some ideas are too fragile to expose too early. They need space to be nurtured, challenged, shaped. They need failure without an audience, because the presence of an audience, especially an uninformed one, can distort your instinct. You start building for approval instead of for purpose. You start editing yourself before you've even begun. The most timeless creations, the ones that last, are often born in obscurity. They're built during seasons of focus, not popularity, and that's where excellence comes from. Not from being watched, but from being committed. You don't need everyone to know what you're doing. You need to know why you're doing it. We often forget that privacy is not the enemy of authenticity. On the contrary, privacy can be the guardian of authenticity. When you allow yourself the space to grow privately, you protect your integrity. You protect your ability to change your mind, to evolve, to go back and refine before revealing. That refinement is what makes the eventual visibility meaningful, not just flashy. There's also something powerful in restraint, in knowing you have something good, but choosing not to flaunt it. It creates inner security. When you don't need to prove something, it's usually because you already believe it yourself. That's where trust lies not in how much you declare your value, but in how deeply you live it. Not everything valuable needs to be turned into a performance. Not every win needs a post. Not every thought needs a thread. Some things are meant to be experienced, not explained. Some moments are meant to be held, not published. When you stop measuring value by visibility, you start noticing the richness of your own private life, the quiet victories, the lessons that hit before you even have the words to describe them, the people who show up without needing to be seen doing so. And there's something else: the more visible you become, the more you risk losing control of your own narrative. People will interpret, distort, and project. That's the nature of exposure. So if you haven't anchored yourself in your own values, visibility can become dangerous. It can pull you into the current of public opinion before you've learned how to swim against it. This is why foundations are laid in private. So when the world sees the house you've built, it's not just for show, it's something that can withstand the weather. Heal privately, help publicly in that order. There is a powerful movement in our time that encourages vulnerability. Share your story, speak your truth, let others see the real you, and this has opened doors for authenticity, for courage, for connection that wasn't possible a decade ago. But with this openness has come a subtle confusion, the belief that healing must happen in public to be real, that your pain must be visible to be valid. We've started to glorify the process before it's complete, as if being transparent about your struggle automatically makes it a source of wisdom. But the truth is, not all wounds are meant to be exposed while they're still bleeding. Healing is a deeply personal journey. It's complex, layered, often nonlinear. It doesn't follow a predictable script, and it certainly doesn't owe anyone a performance. When we try to heal in public too soon, we risk turning our pain into content. We invite opinions before we've found clarity. We place our recovery in the hands of people who may not understand it, respect it, or know how to hold it. And when that happens, we can slow down or even derail our own growth. To heal privately is to give yourself space. It's not about hiding. It's about honoring the process. Some experiences need silence to be understood. Some emotions need solitude to be felt fully. The presence of an audience, even a well-meaning one, can unintentionally shift your focus away from healing and toward managing perception. You start wondering not just how you feel, but how your story sounds. You begin curating your truth instead of exploring it. That's when the healing stops being real and starts becoming a show. There is value in stillness, in taking time to sit with what happened, what it meant, and how it changed you away from the eyes and opinions of others. This doesn't mean you walk through pain alone. It means you walk with people who have earned the right to hear your story, a therapist, a mentor, a close friend, someone who can hold space without judgment or agenda. Healing in private is not isolation. It's intention. It's knowing that the more grounded you are in your own truth, the more useful that truth becomes to others down the line. Once healing has taken place, or at least begun to take deep root, that's when your story has the power to help. Not as a desperate cry for validation, but as a gift. When you've done the hard, unseen work of facing your pain, integrating your lessons, and finding meaning in your journey, your experience becomes a resource for others. You're not speaking from an open wound. You're speaking from a scar, something that hurt once, but no longer controls you. Helping publicly doesn't mean becoming a guru or building a platform around your past. It simply means offering your journey to others as proof that healing is possible. It's sharing your perspective not to gain attention, but to create resonance. People can tell the difference. They know when someone is speaking from a place of resolve versus someone who is still unraveling. And while both are human, only one can truly guide. There is a weight to public vulnerability that we don't always acknowledge. Once your story is out there, it takes on a life of its own. People will project onto it, question it, debate it. If you haven't fortified yourself internally, that scrutiny can become damaging. That's why the order matters: heal first, then help. Because once you've done the work privately, once you've built strength in the quiet, you can stand strong in the storm of public opinion. You don't need to defend yourself because you're no longer defined by what happened to you. Another reason for healing in private is clarity. When you're still in the middle of your pain, your perspective is limited. You're too close to the emotion, too deep in the fog. Sharing from that place can be messy, not raw in a powerful way, but confusing for you and others. Reflection requires distance, and distance requires time. Only with time can you separate the signal from the noise, the truth from the reaction, the insight from the emotion. When you heal privately, you gain the ability to choose your words with care. You tell the story in a way that uplifts, not re-traumatizes. You learn how to speak with authority, not just emotion. You gain the power to be responsible with your vulnerability, understanding that your story doesn't just belong to you. Once it's told, it affects others too. There is also something sacred about what happens in the quiet. In the late night journaling, in the therapy sessions, in the quiet prayers or conversations that no one else hears. That's where the foundation is built. That's where resilience is formed. Public healing often skips over these moments, focusing instead on the visible milestones, the confession, the post, the revelation. But true healing is made up of small, almost invisible choices: choosing compassion over bitterness, choosing honesty over avoidance, choosing growth over comfort. When you've done that work and you choose to help others, your story carries weight. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. It comes with scars, not open wounds. It comes with perspective, not just pain. And most importantly, it comes with the humility that knows the difference between sharing to serve and sharing to be seen. This is where integrity is found, in knowing that not every part of your life needs to be shared in order to matter, that the quiet victories are just as important as the public ones, that your story, when offered at the right time, can be a bridge for someone else, not a cry for rescue, but a beacon of hope. And when you do choose to help publicly, your voice carries a different tone. It's steady, calm, assured. It doesn't demand attention, it earns trust, because people can feel when a message comes from depth, when it's been tested in private and found to be true. You don't need to dramatize. You don't need to impress. You simply need to show up whole, honest, and ready to serve. Boundaries protect what matters most. In a world that constantly demands access to your time, your thoughts, your emotions, your presence, boundaries have become more than a luxury. They are essential. Without boundaries, everything important becomes vulnerable to dilution, distraction, or destruction. Your peace, your purpose, your energy, Your relationships, all of them, depend on your ability to draw lines that define what is allowed in and what must stay out. And yet, the idea of boundaries is often misunderstood. We confuse them with barriers, thinking they are cold or closed off. But boundaries are not about keeping people out. They're about keeping your priorities in. Think about your most valuable possessions, your home, your savings, your intellectual property. You put locks on your doors, passwords on your accounts, copyrights on your ideas. Why? Because what is valuable must be protected. The same is true for your emotional space, your mental clarity, your physical energy. You can't give those away freely and still expect to function at your best. Boundaries are the invisible framework that allows you to thrive without being overwhelmed, to serve without being depleted, to connect without being consumed. Many people struggle with boundaries because they've been conditioned to associate them with guilt. Say no, and you're selfish. Protect your peace, and you're difficult. Choose rest over hustle, and you're lazy. This conditioning teaches us to be available at all times, to respond immediately, to share generously, even when it costs us our well-being. But constantly saying yes to others means constantly saying no to yourself. And over time, that imbalance creates resentment, burnout, and confusion about who you really are. Boundaries are an act of self-definition. They declare what is acceptable and what is not to punish others, but to clarify the terms of engagement. They're not walls built out of fear. They're doors that open and close with intention. A person with strong boundaries doesn't reject connection. They create the conditions for healthy connection. They don't isolate themselves. They become selective about what influences them, knowing that not every voice deserves a seat at the table. In 2025, the pressure to be always on has intensified. The notifications don't stop. The platforms are endless. The expectation to produce, perform, and participate is constant. Without boundaries, you will be pulled in every direction. You'll start answering questions that weren't meant for you, fighting battles that aren't yours, and living a life that doesn't align with your core values. The result is a sense of fragmentation, like pieces of you are scattered everywhere, but none of you is fully present anywhere. Boundaries are the antidote to fragmentation. They create wholeness. They bring coherence to your life by reminding you of what truly matters. You begin to prioritize depth over width, meaning over noise, presence over performance. You stop trying to be everything to everyone and start being fully yourself with the people and projects that align with your purpose. This shift doesn't just protect you, it empowers you. It gives you the strength to say, "This is where I end, and that is where you begin," which is the foundation of both individuality and relationship. When you establish boundaries, you create the space for intentional living. You no longer react impulsively to every request or opportunity. You respond thoughtfully, based on your values. That's what boundaries allow: the pause between stimulus and response. The ability to ask, does this serve me? Does this align with who I'm becoming? Am I choosing this out of obligation or out of purpose? These questions bring clarity, and clarity is what cuts through the chaos. But boundaries are not just about saying no to others. They are also about saying no to your own self, sabotage, to the part of you that people pleases to avoid conflict, to the part that overcommits because you're afraid to disappoint, to the part that says yes to what feels urgent instead of what is truly important. Boundaries require self-awareness. They demand honesty. They are not static, they evolve as you do. And the more you grow, the more refined your boundaries become, not because you're becoming harder, but because you're becoming wiser about what truly deserves your energy. The people who respect your boundaries are the people who respect you, and the people who push against them are often the ones who benefited from your lack of them. Setting boundaries will disappoint some people. That's part of the process, but every time you honor a boundary, you are telling yourself, "I am worth protecting. My energy is not infinite. My time is not disposable. My mind and heart are not open forums for unlimited access. This is what self-respect looks like in action. Boundaries also allow you to be more generous, not less. When you protect your energy, you show up more fully. When you guard your time, you invest it more intentionally. When you say no to what drains you, you say yes to what restores you. That restoration is what allows you to give meaningfully, sustainably, and with joy. It's a paradox. The more you protect yourself, the more you have to give. Because you're no longer giving from a place of depletion. You're giving from a place of wholeness. In relationships, boundaries are the difference between connection and enmeshment. They help you love others without losing yourself. They create room for respect, empathy, and growth. When boundaries are clear, everyone knows where they stand. There's less resentment, less confusion, less emotional volatility. You're not guessing what the other person needs, and you're not expecting them to read your mind. Communication becomes cleaner. Responsibility becomes shared. Trust becomes easier to build. Professionally, boundaries guard against burnout. They allow you to focus on deep work instead of being caught in a cycle of constant reaction. They give you the power to define your own metrics of success, rather than letting others define them for you. You start designing your days instead of surviving them. You start aligning your calendar with your calling, instead of just cramming tasks into every open slot. Digital boundaries are just as critical. In a world that never stops scrolling, you need to create digital fences, time without screens, space without noise, zones where your attention is protected. Because attention is the new currency and everyone is trying to spend yours. If you don't guard it, it will be stolen by default. Notifications, messages, news cycles, they will invade every corner of your mind until you forget what silence feels like. And in that silence, you remember who you are. Boundaries remind you that your life is yours. Your thoughts, your feelings, your focus, your future, they are all yours to manage, nurture, and direct. The world will always try to shape you. It will always try to pull you into its pace, its priorities, its patterns, but boundaries give you a way to resist, to slow down, to choose differently. They don't just protect what you have, they protect what you're building. Your vision, your identity, your peace, boundaries are not just a defense. They are a declaration. This matters, and I'm going to protect it accordingly.